Welcome back to my channel for a very interesting episode, and I think I promised this about a couple of weeks back in my introductory video about the new Fuji GFX100RF that I will do a detailed comparison between this new compact medium format camera and the Leica Q3, and I have both here in front of me on the table, the Leica Q3 28, the Leica Q3 43. And by the way, on all three cameras I have unmounted the hand grips, which is something people always criticize when I do this type of comparisons. Why did you not remove the hand grip? This time it's removed, so don't worry, I will hopefully check the box when it comes to this criteria. And the video will come in two parts. This part is the first part, and it will be about a comparison of design, features, menu system, lenses, you know, what have you, all of that. And the second part will be about image quality, and I will, under studio conditions, shoot images with all three cameras and compare them side by side, and also apply different metrics like signal to noise to get an impression what is the better compact camera. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, help me to increase the reach of my channel, and I will be grateful for it, and you will get my thumbs up if you help me out and subscribe to my channel, and also share my videos, of course, to other pro photographers and photo enthusiasts. Now, when it comes to dimensions, there is the obvious and the not so obvious. And dimensions of the Q328 and the Q343 are the same. So let's move one of them aside and let's have a look. And if we put the GFX100RF and the Leica Q328 side by side, we see, and it's easy to see, that actually the height of the GFX100RF has a larger dimension. And if we turn them by 90 degrees, we see from a width perspective, they are almost the same. I would say the Leica Q3 is maybe 1 or 2 millimeters smaller if we look at that dimension here, but it's almost a match. And if we look at the depth, let's put them in this way, it also looks kind of the same, although it's clear if I compare them that the Leica Q3 here is a little bit longer in the depth than the Fuji GFX100RF. And by the way, I said I removed the hand grip, but still what I'm telling you here is not completely fair, because these cameras here, all three of them, are fully equipped with accessories now. So there is, for instance, a protector on each of these lenses. I have mounted the lens hoods, and if you remove lens hoods on the Leica Q3, for instance, it becomes a bit shorter. But the big trick actually comes when we look at the GFX100RF. I have it here in the way I shoot it. That's for me the realistic setup. I want a lens hood, I want a protector inside. I'm going to show you this in a moment. But this camera out of box comes in a much more compact form. Not in terms of width, not in terms of height, and I'm going to post a separate video about my hand grip proposal for that camera, but in terms of depth. And you can actually make this camera much more compact, I would say almost fitting into the pocket of a coat, if you are not shooting it in the constellation I'm using here with the lens hood and the protector and the corresponding extension ring I need to mount that protector. So let's have a look into that, and let's be fair that at the very end, yes, from a height perspective, the GFX100RF is larger. You see it here, it extends by probably 1 centimeter plus the Q3. From a width perspective, they are kind of comparable, give or take, plus or minus 1 millimeter. But from a depth perspective, the GFX100RF can be made much more compact, fitting into the pocket of a coat, and that's not possible with the Leica Q3, because that one here as an extension has only the lens hood. I can remove the lens hood, of course, but then if I would also remove the protector, that's end of story. So this is the shortest version I can have for that lens coming out of the camera body. And on the GFX100RF, I can actually make this much more compact. And I want to quickly show that now in the next couple of minutes. So let's have a look how this works. First of all, we have here a lens cap. That lens cap is very nice. It's actually construction we also see on some Leica M lenses here. So you just slide it off the lens hood. Then we have a lens hood. I can unscrew that and remove it. We have here a protector, and that protector stays on for the time being, but I can remove the whole extension here if I want by unscrewing it. Let me show you. So this is the way it works. It cannot drop off here, it's safe. And you see now this lens is much more compact. And then there is a ring I can mount here on the lens. Let's do this quickly. And then the chrome finish lens cap looks like this. It's actually sitting in a very solid way on this camera here. And then look how compact this becomes. Let's now do the comparison again in order to be fair. And then you see from a depth perspective, the Q3, even if we remove the lens hood, let's do this quickly. Let's, for the sake of completeness, to avoid some bad comments here, also remove the protector. And then if you put this like this, you see the Q3 from a depth perspective is still larger than what we have on the GFX100RF. And the same applies to the Q3 43mm, which I have in the back. I don't have to disassemble this. I think I made my point. But for me, this is not a realistic setup. This is not the way I shoot this camera. Of course, if I would be obsessed by smallest dimensions, I could compensate for the larger height we have here when we compare it to the Q3 and the almost about the same width by a much shorter depth here. But that's not the way I shoot it. I really want that lens hood on, and I also have this beautiful chrome finish lens cap in the box and do not use it outside when I go in the field and shoot or when I do street photography. So let's put this aside. Let's get this one assembled again. And there are some spare outs here which I need to pay attention to. Let me see how this works. Oh, first of all, let's get this ring off. No problem. And then we'll see the spare outs. Here, you see here's a spare out, here's a spare out, and that's where we need to fit this thing here. And then we can screw it in. Very simple. A lot of turning the ring, and then it sits firmly. And now we can also mount the lens hood again. By the way, very solid mechanics. In the same way as what I'm used to from Leica, the build quality of these cameras, all three of them, is just fantastic. Look how it snaps in. I do this again for you. Hear the click. Wonderful, beautiful. And then we have this lens cap just sliding onto the lens hood, and it's safe and it sits firmly. It will not go off if I have this in my backpack. So that's the way it is. I think that's all I wanted to say to my first point, namely dimensions. So in general, the GFX100RF does not only look larger, it is larger, and nevertheless, in terms of depth, we can make this much more compact than the Q3 by using the original lens cap, this ring, and removing the lens hood and the protector. But then there's no protector on the glass, and that's not what I want. And I also think in various situations, I'm grateful to have a lens hood, period. So that's the realistic setup, how I want to compare them when it comes to design and dimensions. Let's for a moment, and as a second point, talk about robustness. And there is another reason besides that I want the lens hood on all of these cameras, why in particular I want to have it on the GFX100RF. Because if you look into the specifications of the camera, if it comes out of the box in the smaller setup, the more compact lens setup, where you have this chrome finish lens cap and you do not have the extension ring and the protector and the lens hood, the camera is not out of the box weather sealed. Whereas if you move this extension ring, if you move a filter or protector, it can be a simple UV filter like I use here, or it can be some other filter like a neutral density filter if you want, or a polar filter. It will, in the whole combination here, make the camera weather sealed. There is no specific standard which Fuji mentions here, how much this camera is weather sealed, but it will for sure withstand rain, splash water, and also dust. And that's the way it is. That's why I always will use the camera in this setup, because it makes by construction the camera more robust. Now on the Leica Q3, and that's the same for the Q3 28 as for the 43, we have weather sealing out of the box. And there is also a standard Leica is mentioning in the specifications, namely it's an IP52. And that means this camera will definitely withstand any rain, splash water, dust, and so on. And it's also important on all of these cameras here that they have some weather sealing, because there is no way you can remove the lens as a user and remove dust or dirt from the sensor. That's not possible. Then you have to send it in to the manufacturer and they will take care of it and do a full service. But you as a user, as a photographer, cannot remove the lens. And that's why it is important that these cameras are weather sealed, which is the reason why my GFX100RF will always go in this setup, which I called more realistic a moment ago in the video. There is one point of criticism I have here on the GFX100RF, and that's the doors for the ports. I really don't like the way they are done. It feels a little bit cheap, a little bit like plastic. Actually, it is probably plastic, and it also doesn't look super weather sealed to me. And on the Q3, let's play this time with the Q3 43. We don't have that, right? We have this very solid battery construction here, which pops out if you give it a gentle push. We have here the card compartment, and that closes actually super solidly. And it also has here a rubber sealing, which I don't see on the GFX. Let's have a look here. For instance, the card slots are here. And also this door here looks a little bit, I don't know, maybe vulnerable. Is that the right way to say it? It looks more vulnerable. I think that's the politically correct way to say it, but it doesn't look super weather sealed to me if I compare this with what I see on the Q3 cameras. And that is a point of criticism for me, which at least I wanted to mention. Everything else on that camera is solid like a rock. I showed you before how the lens hood is snapping in if you click it in, and all the control elements, we come to that in a moment. Everything is super solid in my hands. I like it a lot. What I also like on the GFX more is there is some curvature here already on the camera body, which gives you a nice hand grip. That's not there on the Q cameras. They are flat here. There is no curved part of the camera body here, which gives you a solid grip. You actually need a hand grip on these cameras. This one here you could shoot without a hand grip, I think, because you have a naturally embedded hand grip here in the camera body already. And I think from a robustness perspective and handling perspective, that's it. What I want to cover now is a discussion about control elements, because here I also see some interesting, significant differences. So let's talk about control elements, which includes for me the LCD screens, the electronic viewfinder for image composition, and other control elements on the camera body. And let's start with the LCD screen. So on the Q3 cameras, these screens can be tilted. And you see here that's convenient, of course. This is good for overhead shots. This is good if you are having the camera low down on the ground. And that's the same for the Q3 43 as well as for the Q3 28. But it only tilts in one direction, and the same is true for the Fuji GFX. So by the way, here the handling is pretty simple. You have here a little bit of a spare out, and then you can pull out the screen. Overhead shots, shots low down on the ground, and it's also only tilting in one direction. In terms of technical specifications, it looks from just staring at the three cameras that the GFX has a slightly larger LCD screen. And that's not fairy tale, it's actually true. Because here on the Q3 cameras, we have 3-inch screens, TFT, and here we have a 3.15-inch screen. And the resolution is also higher on the Fuji. We have here 2.1 million dots, and on the Q3 cameras, we have, give or take, 1.84 million dots. All screens on the table in front of me are touch panels, and by automatic switching, when you approach with your eye the electronic viewfinder, or by pushing a button, you can on all three cameras switch between the LCD and the built-in electronic viewfinder. The electronic viewfinder on all three cameras is an OLED screen, and it's 5.76 million on all three cameras in terms of resolution. The magnification on the Leica cameras here is a little bit lower, 0.76 times, whereas on the Fuji we have 0.84 times. If I would have to describe and explain the concept of mechanical control elements on the Q cameras versus the Fuji camera here, I would say the Leica camera has a pragmatic, functional but minimalistic design, and the GFX100RF has a sophisticated design. And let me quickly explain what I mean by that. If we look at the Q cameras here, and we come to the lenses later, so let me skip for a moment aperturing and macro setting and all of that. But we have here a shutter speed dial, We have here an on-off switch. Embedded in the on-off switch is the shutter release button. We have a control wheel here, and embedded internally is another button, which all can be programmed like these customizable function buttons here. Then we have a play button, we have a 4-directional control button with a push, a selector button in the middle, and a menu button, and that's it. There are no elements on the front side of the camera if you look here, and all in, like we know it from all Leica cameras, the SL3, the Leica M rangefinder cameras, and the Q cameras, all of them, they are pragmatic, they get the job done, but their design is minimalistic. In contrast to the Leica cameras, the GFX100RF is a lot, but definitely not minimalistic. And I would call it sophisticated in the way they integrated a lot of mechanical control elements in a very compact camera body. And I covered some of them, probably the most important of them, in my introductory video on the GFX100RF already. But let's have a quick look. So first of all, instead of a 4-directional control button, we have here a true joystick. And it can also be pushed, so it clicks if you push it. We have a menu and OK button, a display back button, a play button, a drive and delete button. We have here single autofocus, continuous autofocus and manual focus, which we can select via a mechanical control element. We have here the aspect ratio selector, which I showed in my first video on that camera, which you can mechanically control. We have here a shutter speed dial, which is beautifully made, and we can pull this up and get control over our ISO settings via a little aperture or window here in that control dial, and then you push it down and it's fixed and set. We have an exposure compensation dial here, we have another button here, we have here a selector which is pre-programmed to give you focal length simulations, which by the way you can do on the Leica Q3. If you look into my tutorials, you get actually the digital zoom, the digital crop, or the focal length simulation, whatever you want to call it, and can assign it to a customizable function button. But here it's integrated in a very natural way. We have also, of course, here an on-off switch with an integrated shutter release button, and so on and so on. But this design is highly sophisticated. And we have, of course, the famous Q button here for the quick menu. And if we compare the design, we can say, here is the minimalistic Leica cam, here is the sophisticated Fuji cam. Now, there is a philosophical question behind all of that, because Leica doesn't want the photographer to get distracted by too many control elements. And on all of these cameras, you, of course, have also the touch screen, which gives you additional functionality. But I personally think that I would not say it's superior to have it this way, but I have rather more mechanical control elements on a camera than less, because I'm not really a touchscreen person. I like to have mechanical control. It also gives the camera a retro style appearance, and once you get used to it, getting used to it takes longer on a Fuji GFX camera than on a Leica Q camera, believe me. But you will get your tutorial on this camera in the same way as I did tutorials on the Q3 cameras, of course, once in a while on my channel. But once you got used to it, it will be superior for your workflow to have more mechanical control elements on a camera. I'm fully convinced about that. Although from a pure design perspective, I like the minimalistic design we have on these Q cameras. And if you follow me on my channel, you know how much I love Leica and how many Leica gear I have in my equipment. But this clearly is something which, once you get used to it, will help you to improve in your workflow. And it gives you a very sophisticated, I use that word again, way to actually operate the camera via control elements on the camera body. Let's now quickly talk about the lenses in these compact cameras. So on the Leica Q3 cam, we have, first of all, here we have a Summilux, widest open is an f1.7, and we also have a beautiful aperture ring with clicks. I've shown this many times on my channel. You can also shoot in aperture automatic mode here, and that's the red A here. And on the Q3 43, we have an Apo-Summicron, which is the best of the best in the Leica world, and classically and in a routine way, it starts widest open at f2.0 with beautiful clicks. And you can stop all the way down on both Q cameras to an f16. And that's the way it works. Now on the Fuji GFX, one of the most points of criticism is that this cannot be shut very wide open. The widest open aperture is an f4. We have here, by the way, also clicks, but they are more silent than on the Leica lens, and they are in 1/3 stops here. So this is the first third, second third, and then we stop down full stop from f4 to f5.6. And widest open f4, of course, is not what we are used to from Leica Q cameras, and it made me very skeptical when I saw this at the introduction of the camera in the specifications. Now, admittedly, in my daily shooting with the GFX100RF, I actually don't notice, because for me this is more a street photography camera, a reportage photography camera, not so much for people photography, although you can shoot very nice photos of people with wide angle lenses. And we have here a focal length of 35mm and here 28mm if we apply the corresponding crop factor of 0.79 between a medium format sensor with 44x33mm and a full frame format sensor with 36x24mm, we end up at kind of the same field of view here, although the aspect ratio naturally on the sensor of the GFX is a 4:3 and here on the full frame sensor is a 3:2. Where it matters much more to me being able to shoot wider open is if we have a longer focal length like on the 43mm Q3 camera. Here it really matters to me. And with the f2.0 and 43mm, which is a normal focal length, you can actually shoot very nice portraits, and you can use this in a very nice way for fashion and people photography, and also for street and landscape. Because it's not really a tele lens, it's still a normal focal length you have here, but it already gives you an extended focal length compared to 28mm field of view on full frame, or here on the medium format sensor, the corresponding 35mm. That's why here the widest open f2.0 matters much more for me than on the Fuji GFX100RF, where so far in my shootings, and I did shoot this camera intensely by now, I actually can live with a widest open f4.0. But it would have been nice, of course, if Fuji would have given us here at least a widest f2.8. That's something I would have really appreciated, but what I hear from people who are closer to Fuji, I'm closer to Leica, not so much to Fuji, although I shoot a lot of Fuji gear. They never approached me and wanted to collaborate with me, but I think here an f2.8 would have been terrific. But I wanted to finish my sentence. What I hear from people closer to Fuji is that they had no chance in this compact lens, and you saw how compact this becomes, almost like a pancake lens if you remove this extension ring and the lens hood, to have built in a wider open aperture than an f4.0. And that is a big difference here between these cameras. What's also a big difference is that here we have in the Q cameras optical image stabilization, and that helps you to shoot exposures longer handheld. That is in the Fuji GFX also not the case. So of course we have in compact cameras so far no in-body image stabilization where the sensor is floating in a magnetic field or what have you. But we had at least optical image stabilization in the Q3 lenses. We don't even have that here in the GFX lens. There is no optical image stabilization. And I think that is another big difference here. So here, the widest open aperture is an f4, no optical image stabilization. Here, the widest open aperture is an f1.7 on the Summilux, an f2.0, of course, on the Apo-Summicron. And in both Q3 cameras, we have optical image stabilization, which is not there on the medium format compact camera. The last point concerning lenses I want to make is macro photography capabilities. And on both Q cameras, we have a macro function here, which we can switch on the lens. First of all, you see here a distance scale. By the way, there is no distance scale on the Fuji again. Think of this camera without the extension ring and the lens hood, and then it's kind of a pancake lens here, and there is no scale here for distance or for depth of field, which we have on the Q cameras, of course. And I can switch into macro mode now, and then the distance scale will change to near distance. I've shown this many times on my channel. The same is the case on the Q3 43, of course. Let's have a look here with a different scale, of course, because we have a different focal length here. There are minor differences. And we don't have this on the Fuji GFX. No distance scale, no depth of field indication, and also no macro switch. But nevertheless, you can do nice close-ups with the Fuji GFX. And let's quickly remind us in the specs I posted some time back when I did talk about macro shooting with the Leica Q3 43mm. And the specs I showed there is that we have here on the Q3 28mm a 17 centimeter minimum focusing distance. On the Q3 43, we have a 27 centimeter minimum focusing distance. The magnification or maximum reproduction ratio on both cameras is almost the same, 0.26 times on the Q3 28 and 0.25 times on the Q3 43. Now on the Fuji GFX100RF we have a minimum focusing distance of 20 centimeter. So it's sitting somewhere in between the Q3 28 and the Q3 43. And I have not found any specifications about maximum reproduction or magnification with that lens, but I have published in my video about macro photography of this beauty here a formula where you can calculate it. And maximum magnification, of course, is a property of the lens, has nothing to do with the sensor built into the camera, and it needs only two parameters, namely the minimum focusing distance and the focal length. And if I plug in the values for the GFX into this formula, I end up at a maximum reproduction or magnification of this lens here of 0.29. So we have 0.29, 0.26, 0.25. And of course you get then variations of the scheme if you use the digital focal length simulations in these cameras, or you could also call it a digital crop into the sensor and then magnify even more. And because you have here 100 megapixel of resolution, you also have more reserves for that. So I would say in terms of macro capabilities, and maybe I do a dedicated video on that to show it to you with sample images, I think the GFX is at least at par with the Leica Q3 cameras because of a minimum focusing distance sitting between these two Q3 cameras and highly likely a maximum magnification of 0.29 times. A big difference between these three cameras, of course, and I cannot show you because the lenses are fixed mounted on these cameras, is the sensor. So in all three cameras we have backside illuminated sensors, which is a modern technology. If you want to shoot in low light, you will get better results. Of course, stacked sensors are even better. That's not what we have in here, but we have at least BSI, which stands for backside illuminated. We have here full frame sensors, 36 times 24 millimeter in terms of dimensions. We have here a medium format sensor with a little bit of rounding. It's 44 millimeter times 33 millimeter. And we have here 100 megapixel, and here we have, give or take, 60 megapixel. Well, to be precise, here is probably 102, and here is 60.x. Whatever it is, let's call it a 60 and 100. And of course that gives you more reserves in digital focal length simulation, which I showed in my first video on this camera here, but I also showed a couple of times on these cameras here if you go for the digital crop or the magnification, digital magnification. And you can play with that in a very nice way in photo, so still image mode, as well as in video mode. And of course you have here more reserves on the medium format sensor to crop in. And that is something which we just have to acknowledge. We have different aspect ratios, but we have here an aspect ratio dial, which I will use for my comparison of the Leica Q3 cameras with this beauty here when it comes to image quality. I can just switch here very simply on this wheel here from 4 to 3 to 3 to 2. I have a reduced resolution then, of course, we'll look into that in part 2, but we get then exactly the same field of view and same aspect ratio between the Q3 28 and the GFX100RF. If we look into the handling of the camera from the inner values, there is a lot I like in both cameras. So let me switch this on quickly. And if you look into the GFX menu system, this is much more complex and complicated with sub-menus and layered menus than what we have in the Leica Q3 cameras. And it's kind of consistent with the design of the camera body. We have more mechanical control elements here, and we have also a more sophisticated menu system with more functions and features. For instance, if we go here, let's go here to this one here. And if you look here, we have here more bracketing options we can use. And for instance, focus bracketing is something we do not have on the Leica Q3 cameras, which, by the way, in close-up shots or kind of macro photography will help you a lot. And this camera is not only more complex in the menu, more difficult to handle, and you need more time to get used to. It is also more sophisticated in terms of functions and features. If we look into the Q cameras, let's take the Q343 this time, and I switch this on. The menu system is very clean, very simple, very much straightforward. Still not with the nice icons, or icons as we should professionally call them. We have them in the Leica SL3, but nice, tidy and clean. And it's not complicated. I always claim that you can learn to use this camera in a very quick way, whereas on the GFX100RF, it will need you a little bit of effort, and that's why I will also publish and post, of course, a video tutorial on how to handle and operate that camera. So also here it's consistent with the camera body and the control elements. It's less sophisticated, it's less complicated, it's easier to learn. You have also less features, no focus bracketing, and some features are just not there, which you find in a GFX camera like this one here. Oh, and by the way, I said the GFX100RF has more features, for instance, focus bracketing for focus stacking, which you don't have in the Leica Q cameras. I should at least mention that there is a neutral density filter built into the camera, and that is super convenient, of course, if you want to shoot longer exposures in daylight in order to get your water silky if you shoot over a river or a lake or what have you. And there are definitely more features built into this camera than what you have in the Q3 cameras, which again makes the camera, I use the same word as before when we talked about design, more sophisticated. When it comes to the focus system, these cameras are very much comparable, and I don't want to go too much into details here because you can look this up in the specifications. So how many frames per second can you shoot still with continuous autofocus and all of that. I think that's a bit of a tedious exercise that doesn't make us much smarter if we go through that in detail. But what's the case, and what I should mention, of course, all three cameras have contrast detection and phase detection with pH, but they also have phase detection with an F, so the face of human beings. We have animal detection here, and here we have also artificial intelligence trained other subject recognition programs in the same way as we have it, for instance, in the Fuji GFX100 Mark II, and that helps you, of course, catching focus. In all three cameras, the focus system is not lightning fast, and if you want to have a really fast autofocus system, I recommend you a Sony Alpha 1 Mark II or a Nikon C8 or a Nikon C9 or maybe a Canon EOS R1 or R5 Mark II, whatsoever, but don't go for compact cameras if you need the fastest autofocus in the world. That's not what these cameras are made for. So I think it's tedious to go into a detailed comparison, but the focus system is much more sophisticated in the Q3 than in its predecessors, and quite sophisticated in the GFX100RF. And here we even have more subject recognition programs which are trained to catch the subject and to also catch subjects in motion. In terms of video capabilities, the Leica Q3 can go up to 8K, I show this in a moment. And on the GFX100RF, we are restricted to a 4K resolution, despite the fact that the resolution of the sensor is much higher. And the way to see this is we go into the drive setting here. There is a drive button here, you see this. And you will see this goes very fluent down from still image to high-speed burst, low-speed burst, ISO bracketing, white balance bracketing, bracketing in terms of exposure, and then multi-exposure. And now if I switch to the last setting, which is this little video camera icon here, you will get a little bit of a lag in the image. It will turn black for a second. Have a look here. That means we are now in movie mode. So if I go into movie mode, you get the meter here for your sound. And if you go into the menu, we can then go for the movie mode. And in the movie mode, you see this is 4K is basically end of story. We have here also DCI 4K, and then we have 4K, we have full HD and so on, but there is no 8K mode on this camera in the same way as we have it. Oh, now I recorded. I'm sorry, I have to stop this storing. All right, I don't want that. Let's take the Q3 43 here. Let's switch it on. And people who follow me on my channel and everyone else, of course, also know that you can go into video mode by swiping, and then we get also the video menu here. And if we go into that video menu and then we get here on the video format, we can actually go up, let's take MOV, up to 8K and cinematic 8K. And that is something which is not there on the medium format camera. It's only on the full frame Leica Q3 cameras. I don't miss it. I think it is convenient from time to time to shoot 8K, but this is not a camera, in my opinion, which is primarily built for video shooting, so I'm fine with 4K and can fairly well live with it. It's just a difference I need to mention between this one and the Q3 cam. Here we have more video capabilities. Last but not least, let's quickly look into the weight of these cameras, and I want to use the full spec out of these cameras. I said this camera is only ready to go out into the field for me with the lens hood and the extension ring and the protector, and the same applies to the Q3 cameras. I want to have the UV filter to protect the lens, I want to have the lens hood. So let's check the weight of these three cameras, and let's start with the Q3 43. And we see this is exactly 800 gram. Then we have here the Q3 28. This is 802 gram, give or take about the same. Let's look into the Fuji GFX100RF. And here we are at 826 gram. So in the full setup, there is not really a big difference. You will not feel it in your luggage whether you travel with a Q3 camera or a GFX100RF. If you want to use the full setup in the way I have it here, with protector or filter, with lens hood, battery inside, SD card here and SD cards here, it's fully spec'd out, and we have basically no feelable difference, or we could say the difference in terms of weight is negligible. All right, I think for part one, there could be much more nitty-gritties I could go into, like the number of autofocus fields, and you know, I mentioned subject detection in autofocus already. And so on and so on. I don't think that is really leading somewhere, and I hope I covered all the main differences we have between the Q3 cameras and the GFX100RF. And I hope you stay tuned for part two. I think this will be more technical. If you have seen my video about dynamic range of the Leica Q3 camera some time back, you will have to expect some formulas and a lot of technical stuff when we go into image comparison. But I think it's important to have a second part and to not only look into feature specifications, you know, designs, buttons, macro switch, no macro switch, maximum magnification, what have you, all of that. I think it's important to cover that at the first part, but then we really need to look into image quality and compare it in an environment like here in the studio, where I can make the light in a way that it does not change. I will mention that again at the beginning of the next video, why I think this is important. Let's call it a static subject like Jennifer, my most favorite model, or maybe my little dragon on the shelf here, and then really doing underexposure, overexposure, measuring signal to noise, and comparing the results of these three cameras. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.